Okay, I believe that I'm here now. Hi, everybody. My name is James Hayes. I work at the Air Quality and Odor Laboratory, and I'm talking regarding the industry community nexus, how industry stakeholders engage with communities, odors, and each other. So let's see if I can get things moving. There we go. Okay, so most of this research has to do with biosolids and its interactions with communities. There are traditional drivers for how communities interact with each other, interact with the biosolids management, and okay, I believe this is one through odor. My name is James Hayes. I work at the I'm sorry, Maria. Could you please mute yourself on this chat? Thank you. Talking regarding the industry community nexus, how industry stakeholders. This is very strange. I'm getting a strange feedback. Excuse me. Let's see if I can get things moving. There we go. Okay, so most of this research has to do with biosolids and its interactions with communities. There are traditional drivers for how communities interact with each other, interact with the biosolids. Okay, that should be working now. Okay, I'm ready to present now, I believe. Okay, I'm here now. Hi, everybody. My name is James Hayes. I work at the Air Quality. Let's see if I can get things moving. There we go. Okay, so most of this research has to do with biosolids and its interactions with communities. There are traditional drivers for how communities interact. Okay, I'm going to start presenting, and I hope that this works. So there are traditional drivers and how those, these are ones that we've had for a really long time. Biosolids and other utilities have had these for decades. They refer to odors, urban encroachment, as you know, populations grow closer and closer to what were traditionally isolated utilities and services, as well as an increasing expectations of their environment. So as housing prices go up and other expectations regarding their local environment increase, communities have a greater expectation of what they believe, what their expectations are. However, biosolids has further considerations because there are now emerging challenges for community engagement. This refers to the changing relationship between water and wastewater utilities and its communities. Biosolids is a really good example of this because not only are you asking more of your communities, but the relationship is changing. It used to be water utilities would provide water, communities would provide waste, and that waste would just kind of disappear and you wouldn't have it anymore. There's now going to be sort of increased sustainability considerations where what you put down the toilet and that sort of things, or what's been, how your waste streams behave will be put front and center, and a greater realization of sorry, a greater appreciation of where your waste is going and how it's being implemented. There are increasing health concerns to a certain extent. I believe personally that most of these health concerns are the fact that we simply measure certain contaminants that other that other other industries don't. New legislation as a greater understanding of what is valuable, what is capable of being legislated within this space occurs. Increasing public scrutiny, and I believe that biosolids itself would like to become a market, and that will change the relationship between itself and communities. So we have to ask ourselves, is biosolids management ready to address these new challenges? So most of the research that looks into how stakeholders interact with each other within sort of industry community spaces typically look at communities, but we thought it would be really valuable to look at the other side of the equation. And you can break down non-community stakeholders into two broad groups. We have biosolids management, which is the exclusive space. This includes producers, contractors, managers, end users, that sort of thing. But then you have a greater industry community nexus, which consists of consultants, regulators, government. And this greater nexus is related to odor regulation, community engagement standards, and that sort of thing. And they're looking at more things than just biosolids. They'll be looking at all other similar utility approaches. We will, for this particular piece of research, be looking at the greater industry community nexus. And I think it's important that we appreciate how we understand what these domains do and how they interact with themselves, to understand how best to approach these emerging drivers and these emerging considerations for biosolids management. So how did we do this? We had a scenario exercise methodology, and I'd like to take the time here to thank Michael Asal for allowing us to do this at the 26th CASANZ conference in last year. And this consisted of three components. We had a workshop activity, presentations, and a reflection session. The workshop activity, we made small groups of varying numbers of different stakeholders, although we tried to include a regulator for each of those groups, and getting regulators here was a real boon for the research. And each group was given the same sort of materials and tools. After that, there was a presentation where each group presented in a couple of minutes their project plan based on the questions. And following that, there was a reflection session to assist in how we identified common themes between these groups and how things, how certain strategies were sort of grouped in together. This is just some of the tools that we provided. So at the top left here, these were questions that the group would ask the regulator of the group. So the question would relate to these are the factors that were being asked, and we provided a small description to explain what these particular factors were, and these were inputted in online. And then in addition, fictional scenario, what would be the rough capex, the rough opex, and all these other considerations. We also included a couple of very, very basic images here, which included odor unit boundaries, some windrows, where complaints were coming from. So all pretty straightforward stuff. There was also a brief description on the history of the site and its relationship with communities. So we found some really interesting things here, and we'll talk about them in more detail. We had the islands of expertise effect. We found that there was an enormous number of community engagement practices and an enormous number of odor amelioration practices for the site. Huge number, even for the group that we had. Most of these methodologies were largely reactive, and that's to be expected. But what I'd like to focus on for this slide in particular is that there was a really observed lack of inter and intra-stakeholder communication. So not only would you have, say, for example, the discussion and the sort of collaboration between consultants and regulators often be fairly constrained, but you would have different consultancy groups not really talking to each other very well, or the discussions between the sites or the consultancies, whatever it might be. Oftentimes those communication structures weren't necessarily formalized and often didn't provide the advantages or the capacity that they were looking for, especially considered to practices from the past. So to give you an example of the number of different procedures and policies that were found, these are the examples of the, why isn't that working now? There we go. An example of the number of themes that were sort of discussed by all these different groups. And then we had to categorize those themes further to get some kind of structure as to all these different themes. The ones presented here are only the top 3 that were referenced for these 9 separate groups. We found somewhere in the region of about 70 or so separate themes for, a workshop exercise that was, very straightforward. And I believe they had about an hour and a half to conduct. So what we're finding here is that there is a tremendous amount of expertise and a tremendous variation of approach, which in some cases is beneficial, but as we'll sort of discuss, there are certain disadvantages with this system. So what I'd like to talk about now is what I call the islands of expertise effect. So imagine, rather than Australia being a landmass, imagine it as an ocean mass, if you like, and the communication between these different islands is rather limited, or not necessarily effective. Haphazard. Sometimes there's no communication at all. These islands, by the way, they refer to different consultancy groups. They refer to different governments at each level. They refer to clients. They're basically all these different stakeholders and their relationships with each other. So what do we have with an islands of expertise effect? Most of the approaches are reactive, and there's very little in terms of proactive solutions towards community engagement, which would definitely lead to better outcomes. A lot of the knowledge that consultancies or experts within this field have is implicit. And what I mean by implicit is that it is based upon expertise. There's a reason why within the water industry, within community engagement spaces, that you have a great deal of value placed upon people who have been there for a very long time, rather than people who, come straight out of school or university or whatever it might be. And that is because the knowledge is developed not through any formalized structure, but through their own experiences. And that's a really hard thing to take away and sort of translate into more broader application possibilities. It's very valuable, it's very useful, but everyone's kind of doing it by themselves. And stakeholders have to rely on that. And it means that any one project has great ideas that produce results, but they're doing it in a bubble. And the other issue, of course, is that if everyone's doing things independently, it means that the capacity to establish best practice, the capacity to go beyond what is currently being pursued isn't really there, isn't really capable of being addressed. So what do I mean by sort of enhancing the ways in which community engagement can occur? And by the way, this is in no way limited to community engagement. That just happens to be my specialty. I suspect there are, for a matter of fact, I know that there are a lot of practices with regards to odor amelioration or training or CapEx or whatever else it might be, where different group different tables provided very different results. And again, it's because of that lack of communication. But this is an example where below here, this is the AIP2 collaborative framework system, and the rough idea is that these are the ways in which you can group different community engagement practices. Up here are broad categories of what community engagement practices were suggested by the different groups within our study. And these are the types of community engagement that these themes of community engagement adhered to. So the overwhelming majority of what respondents said could be categorized as either reactive, or it refers to what is known as a knowledge deficit. So the idea is that if you want to make communities happier and more amenable to a local industry, all you have to do is educate them in some capacity. All you have to do is provide for them the advantages, show how great the technology is, and that'll make them more comfortable. Now, unfortunately, that doesn't necessarily work, and if it does work, the impact isn't as great as what we would like to see. And we have so many different, very codified, very well established other ways of having community engagement and providing much more efficacious means of community satisfaction, but we're just not using them. And the reason that we're not using them is because everyone is kind of doing it by themselves. And, in a very uncertain environment where I think to a certain degree, understandably, utilities are hesitant to try new things because they don't want to open up a Pandora's box of community concern. That you'll just stick to these, which will provide some capacity, some community engagement. So some take-home messages. There's a fantastic opportunity because biosolids is within its infancy, but we have to strike while the iron is hot before particular practices are really sort of set in, codifying the ways in which expertise is encapsulated, embracing the enthusiasm of stakeholders as it currently stands, and focusing exactly on what it is that makes effective community engagement is going to be the absolute best way to approach the challenges of emerging sustainability practices. I believe that biosolids and the way in which it engages with its odor issues and with its community engagement can really act as a pilot study for other sustainability practices that are a little bit more developed, that do in some respects have challenges which require a bit more of a concerted effort to address. So I think that's really valuable. So yeah, there's a fantastic opportunity here, but we really need to sort of get going and make sure it's actualized. Thank you so much.